Is there such a thing as good taste?
Oh, yeah. So this essay, I distinctly remember reading this essay because I remember thinking, I like the argument, or sorry, I like the conclusion, but I hate the argument.
Go into that.
I like the conclusion that there is a such thing as good and bad taste. I agree with that premise, or that I guess conclusion, right?
Yeah.
But however, the way that Paul Graham argues why there is good and bad taste, I thought was completely flat-footed. I didn't really appreciate, I guess I should say, the argument he was making, because he applied a lot of his fundamental thoughts in painting and artistry, like legitimate art, to the idea of, can you have, like, the concept of good and bad taste, the concept of taking somebody who's really only painted for maybe a 101 course in college, comparing them to some of the greatest artworks in history, and saying that, okay, there's an obvious gap here, and so taste, there must be something to explain that gap, which is taste.
Yeah.
Um,
And to kind of frame the argument a little bit here, less excerpts, but I'm going to say a couple different quotes here, and then
Go for it.
we'll
Go for it.
So if we start from the premise that there's no such thing as good taste, we end up with conclusions that are obviously false, and therefore the premise must be wrong. That's one thing that he said to kind of frame like this whole idea of like, okay, if we're going to say that, if we want to prove that taste is a good thing, let's try to prove the opposite, and we won't be able to prove the opposite because there's discrepancies in taste, and that just shows that there's a such thing as good taste and bad taste. So if you want to this is another part later in the essay. So if you want to discard the concept of good taste, you also have to discard the concept of good art.
Exactly. Yeah.